Iris here, and today I'm going to be starting a new series for my channel called Deck Decompress. I'm going to have these posted monthly, and I'm going to talk about all of the decks that I have flipped through in the previous month and tell you what I like about them, what I don't, discuss the guidebook a little bit, show you my favorite cards, and talk about maybe who the deck would be best suited for. Today is going to be a little bit of a long one because I am going to review all of the tarot decks that I have flipped through on my channel so far, just to catch us up. Moving forward, I will do these at the end of every month, and I will include oracle decks as well, but today we are just going to focus on tarot. So grab a snack or your favorite beverage and listen to me share my thoughts on all of the decks that I have walked through so far on my channel. So the first deck we're going to talk about is Tarot of the Hidden Realm. This is by Julia Jeffrey and Barbara Moore. So first let's talk about what I like about this deck. Super empowering to work with. The characters all seem to have great confidence, even in cards like the Five of Cups. And while the tarot deck is entitled Tarot of the Hidden Realm and does incorporate a lot of fae, this deck is largely Celtic themed. It even has the Morrigan depicted in the Ten of Swords, which I really enjoy. So what don't I like? There isn't really any diversity at all in this deck. There are no people of color, there's no LGBTQIA plus representation, there are no bigger bodies. You're gonna hear this critique a lot throughout this video. Unfortunately, it's a problem with a lot of the decks on the market today. So let's talk about the guidebook. The guidebook is amazing. I love the guidebooks that Barbara Moore writes. She's such a storyteller, and she tells a story for each of the cards in this deck. And while the guidebook isn't in full color like some of the others that I own by her, it still has images of the cards throughout it. It also has a few unique spreads in the back of the book, as well as a chapter on working with fairies and this tarot deck. Let's talk about some of my favorite cards in this deck. The High Priestess. I love the motion in this card. You can tell she's dancing under the moon and inviting you to join her, and it just feels so mystical. The next card is the Three of Swords. This is one of my favorite depictions of the Three of Swords. While you can see that she is in pain, it's because she had been holding something beautiful. And I think that's just like a beautiful message. Then we have the Nine of Cups. The face of the woman shown in this card is so proud of herself and her accomplishments. One of the small details I love about it is the key that she holds, like it's the key to her own success. So who should buy this deck? If you love fairies, or if you're looking more for a Celtic themed deck, this could be the one for you. It sticks to the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith layout. I would say this deck works better for someone who's a little bit more of an experienced reader. The images really revolve around the characters as opposed to entire scenes that kind of give you more to work with. Something else to keep in mind about this deck is, like almost all of Barbara Moore's decks, they're really not made on the back for reading reversals. If you want to read reversals, you will see that the deck kind of, the images on the back aren't really made for that. So you'll have some like mixed up cards. Next up, we're going to talk about the Elemental Wisdom Tarot. This is a deck published by Taroteca Studios, and there are several things that I like about this deck. Of course, I find the artwork completely stunning, but what I really love is the vibrancy of the colors. I also love the silk matte cardstock, though on occasion I'll admit it can be a bit of a pain to shuffle. I love almost all of the outfits shown in this deck. While I have heard the critique that it seems almost video game style, I don't actually mind that at all. I think it's really nice and well done. I also really love how the backs of the cards are kind of 3D. There are different designs available, but this is the one that I really like. What don't I like? I would like to see more body inclusivity. While there are people of color in the deck, there really aren't any bigger bodies or LGBTQIA plus representation, and that's kind of a shame. I also really wish that this deck had a guidebook included or available for purchase. It would be nice to hear the creators' thoughts on why they chose some of the symbolism and the artwork that they, express the artwork the way that they did. But unfortunately, it does not come with a guidebook. So let's talk about my favorite cards. My favorite cards in this deck starts with the Fool. It looks great, but honestly, the reason that I love this card so much is the brilliant blue sky that's depicted in the background. I think that this is what all cards should print out like. The vibrancy is just, it's breathtaking. And every time I open the box for this deck, I am blown away by how good the sky looks on the Fool. The next card is the Empress. I love the colors that they used. I love her outfit. I love the way the harvest is ready behind her. Definitely brings that aspect of fertility. The Ten of Swords is the last favorite of this deck. I love the vibrancy of the red against that dark, forlorn backdrop that's cast by this heavy scene. It makes you think of blood, but it doesn't actually require the gore. And I really like that depiction. So, who should buy this deck? Because this deck is a little pricier and it doesn't come with a guidebook, and it also seems very character focused as opposed to scene focused, I wouldn't recommend it as a first deck. It's based on the traditional Rider-Waite, so a reader who's familiar with the system wouldn't really have a problem using it, but a newer reader might. The artwork is sort of a video game style, so someone who enjoys that aesthetic would probably really like it as well. Next up, we have the Dark Mansion Tarot. So let's talk about what I like. The artwork is super fun. It's very Tim Burton-esque. I just love the vibe that it gives off, even in more serious cards like the Tower or the Ten of Swords. But it's especially fun in cards like the Hermit and the Fool. I'm obviously in love with the cardstock, like I mentioned regarding the last deck. It's that same matte, like silky matte. I love the backs of these cards. I think that the vibrancy of the color really helps to show off that 3D effect. I think both of these decks really put off that 3D effect very well, but I think this one even more so. It looks like you could just touch in, like, put your hand through the center of this card. I also actually really love the borders that are on the fronts of these cards. They really just bring something to the artwork that's in them. I don't normally love borders on cards, actually, but I feel like these just add to the artwork, really. So what don't I like? As with Elemental Wisdom, as with Tarot of the Hidden Realm, there just isn't really any diversity. This one even more so because there really aren't any people of color in it either. I also wish that there was a guidebook for this deck. I think having a guidebook and a little insight into what the creator was thinking when they made that image really helps and helps you to connect with the deck a bit better. So what are my favorite cards? Again, the Fool. So while I normally shy away from clowns, jesters, mimes, I kind of find them to be creepy, this figure seems so innocent and fun. I also really adore the dog who's trying to rein him in and make sure he doesn't hurt himself by walking off the ledge. The next one I really love is the Lovers. So being in a poly relationship myself, I find this card to allude to that relationship every time I see it. And because of that, it is one of my very favorite depictions of the Lovers. The next card that I adore in this deck is the Hanged Man. He's a vampire. It cannot get cuter than this card as the Hanged Man, unless you look a little closer and see that his bat friend is hanging up upside down next to him. And then finally, the Eight of Wands. I love this card. I, of course, love the nod to steampunk, which you'll see. I actually have a themed steampunk deck. But I love that nod with her cool glasses. But also, if you look close, there's just a cute little black kitten who's along for the ride, and it is adorable. So, who should buy this deck? If you are looking for a nicer deck and you're a beginner, and this might be your first deck purchase, this is actually a great choice. While this deck is a little bit pricier and doesn't come with a guidebook, I feel like because of how the scenes are so well done and just allude to the things that you can pull out of it, they're very They depict entire scenes, and you're able to really hone in and use your intuition to determine what the card is trying to say. I feel like anybody could pick up these cards and read well with them. I also feel like anybody with any Rider-Waite-Smith experience would have an easy time. So I feel like if you're reading intuitively, this is your first deck, or you are a seasoned tarot reader, you can't really go wrong with the Dark Mansion Tarot. Next up, we're going to talk about Tarot de la Nuit. So, what do I like about this deck? The artwork is dreamy. I really like that photo edited style of card. It reminds me of my Star Child Akashic by Danielle Noel. I know that some people don't especially like decks like this, but they're some of my favorites. I also love that they incorporate fairy tales and fantasy stories into their cards, and I also love all the outfits, which is why I picked up the deck in the first place. So what don't I like? Of course, no LGBTQIA+, no people of color, no bigger bodies, just the standard complaint. Also, I really would have loved if they would have discussed in the guidebook what each myth or story the card was based on or referencing. While some of them are super easy to spot, like Elsa, Jon Snow, Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, there are a number that I actually couldn't identify myself. And so that brings us to the guidebook. The guidebook is somewhat small, considering it contains 6 translations. It only includes 1 custom spread, and there isn't really a lot about each of the card meanings. There's a little blurb, but just I feel like it could have been more well done or had a companion guidebook that you could purchase separately. So for my favorite cards, first we have the Empress. I love this depiction of the Empress. She's surrounded by abundance and just part of that world around her. She's so comfortable and at one with everything that she's kind of fallen asleep. The next one is the Wheel. So the Wheel here is shown as the Greek Fates, which is not something that I have seen in a deck before, at least not any of the decks that I own. And I think it is such a great representation for that card. Your life is in the hands of the fates, just like your life goes on with the Wheel of Fates, and there's nothing that you can do about it. You just have to surrender. Then we have the Three of Swords, and the woman who's shown in this card is just trying to heal her broken heart with a sacrifice. And there seems to just be so much beauty in this card, even though it's kind of gruesome. So, who should buy this deck? If you're looking for like a darker or a gothic type of deck, I think this deck would probably fit in that category. It's also for a more advanced reader who's a little bit more familiar with the Rider-Waite-Smith meanings. Again, the pictures in it mostly focus on the character, often not even including the items in the suits like the cups or the swords. If you have some familiarity with the Rider-Waite-Smith system and the card meanings, I think this deck is stunning and totally worth picking up. Next up, we have the Deviant Moon Tarot, and this is by Patrick Valenza. I have the borderless edition. So what I love most about this deck is the artwork. I was drawn to it immediately, even though it's not my typical aesthetic. But as soon as I started working with it, I knew it was a great purchase. It's actually become one of my core decks that I'm using right now. I also really like the odd shape of these cards. I'm not sure why, but I feel like it really emphasizes the artwork. So let's talk about what I don't like. So there are some cards that have titles on them and some that don't. While I generally like all of my cards to have titles, I don't understand the inconsistency here. I have the Morgan Greer Tarot in a tin, and the pip cards don't have titles on them, and I'm not a big fan of that. But if you're gonna do that, at least be consistent. Randomly, the Death card is like the only major arcana without a title on it, and I don't really understand why. Then we have the guidebook. So in the Little White Book, the creator actually talks about how he used photographs of various things like 19th century tombstones and the walls of abandoned insane asylums to create all of the textures that you find throughout the deck. There is a larger separate guidebook that you can pick up to accompany this deck, and I do plan on doing that in the future. So let's talk about my favorite cards. First, we have the Four of Cups. This card is a mood. Like, I love that you can tell that this figure is just dripping with apathy, and the artwork just conveys that emotion so clearly. Then the Six of Swords. So one of the details that I love most about this card is the fact that you see the figure in the card sailing away from a place that is ablaze in fire to find something new, and clearly they are leaving the past behind them. Finally, the Nine of Swords. This is another card that really just conveys emotion. And you can tell that that figure is just beyond stressed and anxious and just flooded with horrible thoughts. So who should buy this deck? While this artwork may not be for everyone, this is such a creative take on the Rider-Waite-Smith system. If you're looking for a more gothic, darker deck that's maybe a little more intense than the Tarot de la Nuit that we had spoken of earlier, this might be a good deck for you. There are some cards that are a little bit easier to read than others, like the Four of Cups, for example, but I think that this deck is generally really beginner friendly. I think anyone could pick it up and read with it. The next deck we are going to talk about is the Crystal Unicorn Tarot. And this deck is by Pamela Chen and it's illustrated by Lisa Higuchi. So, what do I like about this deck? I love the pastel palette that they use. I love all of the adorable unicorns. And I love how this deck just gives off like a gentle vibe. I also love the fact that there are no humans in the deck. This is the only deck that I have where the main characters portrayed are not like humanoid type creatures. I thought that would make this deck a little bit more difficult to work with and to connect with, but thankfully that was not the case. Honestly, it's really hard for me to tell you what I don't like about this deck. I think really the only thing I could come up with is I would have loved to see gilding on these edges. Some sort of color that went along with the color palette, but probably I will just edge it myself with like a pink or a purple metallic ink. So let's talk about the guidebook. I appreciate the guidebook that is included with this deck. I loved the fact that there are pages that you can color throughout. It's a great way to see what the coloring book that they offer is like. I also like the spreads that she includes in the small guidebook. My personal favorite is one called Message from Your Crystal Unicorn Guide. My favorite cards are the Magician. So what can I say about this card other than it is simply adorable? I love that the unicorn is holding an arrow in their mouth as the nod to the Magician's as above, so below gesture. Then we have the Eight of Swords. I love how they have mostly yellows in this color palette here. And when yellow is viewed in a more negative or shadow way, it points to deceit. And I like that the deceit of the Eight of Swords is that you're tricked into thinking that you're trapped when you are actually able to break free anytime that you wish. So I love how they use color to kind of nod to that. Then we have the Four of Wands. So I really appreciate the decorations that are shown on this card, but really I love what appears to be the small trees that they're carrying in their mouths. It's just so adorable. So who should buy this deck? I think this deck would be great for people who love soft colors, cute, adorable unicorns, but mostly I think because it's so very gentle, I think it's appropriate for use in like a self-care practice. So for your personal daily draws or implementing into your own self-care practice. Next up, we have the Steampunk Tarot, and this is another deck by Barbara Moore. It's illustrated by Ali Fell. So what do I like about this deck? Well, I really like the steampunk aesthetic, and the artwork on this deck did not disappoint. It's super expressive. I love the costumes, and of course, Barbara Moore's guidebook is amazing. What don't I like? Not gonna be a surprise. Deck was not diverse. I love a good themed deck, but I appreciate when they showcase more body types, people of color, LGBTQIA plus people. I like to see that diversity, and when it's not there, it's disappointing. I hate to keep harping on this. It's definitely something I would like to see change in mass market decks. Let's talk about the guidebook. All of Barbara Moore's guidebooks are amazing. She goes in depth with a story for each individual card, and she also provides meanings and reading context for each card. You also find several custom spreads in this guidebook, and you can really get to know her thoughts behind why the artwork is what it is for each individual card. So let's talk about my favorite cards. The High Priestess. I love seeing the High Priestess shown as a diviner. I think that's such a cool interpretation, very mystical. Then the World. This World card is just so beautiful, and I love her outfit. Then we have the Eight of Wands. I think this card is a great way to show forward movement that is combined with innovation and ideas. And finally, who should buy this deck? Beginners can pick this deck up and easily read it with a guidebook and the imagery that's shown on the cards. I think if you like the steampunk style, this deck is for you. Next up, we have the Wizard's Tarot. This deck, again, by Barbara Moore, illustrated by Miki Janssens. Great deck. It's very fantasy-based. So it's got great fantasy imagery, great artwork. The clothes are really awesome on the characters. I think the artwork's really well done, and it really brings those characters and those scenes to life, making it really easy to interpret the cards and get those intuitive hits from them. So what I don't like, obviously, again, the complaint about no diversity in the deck. I just love to see that incorporated more. So let's talk about the guidebook. So this isn't a typical Barbara Moore guidebook. This one doesn't really have a story for each card. Instead, it really only has the keywords, the meanings, and some advice about each of the cards. But it does offer numerous custom spreads as well as an entire chapter on the magical path, which is super interesting. So for my favorite cards, first we have the High Priestess. I love her outfit, but I also really love all of the magic that's showing up around her. Just if you had to sum this card up in one word, it would be mystical. Next, we have the Sun. Normally in the Rider-Waite-Smith depiction of this card, you have a toddler shown on the back of a horse. Here we have a full-grown woman who clearly has a goal that she is heading toward quite confidently. She's sure she's going to succeed because she has all of the things that she needs to achieve it. It feels very empowering. Then we have the Queen of Swords. This Queen of Swords is a total boss bitch. Like, she radiates power. She clearly doesn't have time for anyone's bullshit. She is one of my favorite interpretations of the Queen of Swords. So who should buy this deck? Just like any other Barbara Moore deck, I feel like beginners could pick this up, easily read it. There's a great guidebook. The imagery is it really conveys what the card's meaning is. I feel like if you enjoy the fantasy genre, this is definitely something that you could pick up and really enjoy. Next up, we have the Movie Tarot. So what do I like about this deck? I think every single character in the Major Arcana is kind of spot on. When I first flipped through the cards, I was really shocked how well the characters fit the archetypes for the cards they were chosen for. The guidebook breaks that down even further and includes quotes and explanations for why each of the characters were shown in the majors. So what don't I like? While I did mention this in the flip through of this deck on my channel, I was so disappointed by the pip cards. I felt like they didn't even try. There weren't any scenes depicted on them. Instead, it was just 3 coins or 6 cups or whatever. It felt so unfinished. Like, they got to that part of the deck and they were just like, it's fine, put 3 coins on it, put, 5 swords, it's cool. And it just felt really incomplete. So let's talk about the guidebook. So for the guidebook, I wish they'd really taken a little bit more care with it. They seemed to do really well for the characters in the Major Arcana, but when it came to the court card characters, they basically just listed who they were. I really wish they would have explained how they connected the court cards with the characters and why they chose them. So let's talk about my favorite cards in this deck. So first we have the Fool, who's portrayed by Forrest Gump, and it's so fitting. He was so innocent. He had the courage to embrace the changes that life threw his way, and he embraced his uniqueness. Next we have the Tower. When I flipped this card over, I literally laughed out loud. Is there a better card for the Tower than Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction? Say what one more time. And finally, the Page of Wands. I have a bit of an affinity for Will Smith, particularly in the Men in Black movies. I love him as the Page of Wands. I think every time I see it, I totally want to do a rewatch of Men in Black. I think it's a great depiction. So who should buy this deck? While I am not happy about the pips, I do like the deck overall. I think it's a great idea, but it just feels unfinished. I think it's definitely not a deck for beginners or intuitive readers. I think you really have to have a base knowledge of what the pip cards mean, or understand that you're going to need to look up the meanings every time to interpret them if you don't, because the cards aren't really going to give you much in the way of symbolism. But if you are a movie lover with a good understanding of the tarot and maybe you want to collect your decks, I think that this deck is pretty fun and you might want to pick it up. Next up, we have the Modern Witch Tarot, and this is a deck by Lisa Sturl. What do I like about this deck? I adore the diversity, the gender fluidity, the modern take on the Rider-Waite. It's very empowering, but at the same time, it's so incredibly easy to read if you are at all familiar with the Rider-Waite, or even if you are a complete beginner. So what I don't like, honestly, surprisingly, the cardstock is what I like least about this deck. The coating makes it almost impossible to riffle shuffle without making a mess and hurting my hands. I usually have to do hand over hand shuffling, which is not my favorite. And I also don't really like the shine that they have. Obviously, I post on social, but I also do my tarot readings online. And when you have any kind of lighting, it just bounces off of the cards and makes it harder to see the images. So let's talk about the guidebook. The hardcover guidebook is black and white, but it has some really good meanings for the cards in it. It also has a few custom spreads in there that I quite enjoy. Let's talk about my favorite cards. So the first card is the Hermit. This Hermit screams Solitary Witch to me. I adore that so much. The Hermit talks about the wisdom from within, and when we aren't part of a coven, sometimes solitary witches really need to hear you're not less valid because you're solitary, and there is plenty of wisdom that you can find within. Next up is the Moon. Does much need to actually be said about how awesome this card is? They are clearly mid-ritual, but there's some things that the moon is not illuminating for them, such as that monster lurking in the water behind them. It's a great way to depict that the moon doesn't reveal everything to us. And then finally, the Everything is Fine 10 of Swords card. Obviously, this card is going to make it into my faves. She's been stabbed by 10 swords, and she's still looking for some distraction on her phone so she can ignore the pain and pretend that everything's okay, even though it is definitely not. And I think that speaks to something that a lot of us do. Ignore the pain and maybe it will go away. So who should buy this deck? Anybody who's craving a contemporary, inclusive take on the Rider-Waite Smith that holds a lot of symbology and really keeps up the basis of the art of the Rider-Waite Smith while updating it to be a little bit more modern. I think this deck is great for beginners and advanced readers, and especially if you're looking for a little bit more diversity in your deck. And we've come to the last deck in our review, the Luna Soul Tarot by Darren Schill and Mike Metagalia. I'm not sure how to say his name. Anyway, they're the founders of Liminal 11. I honestly picked up this deck one day when I was just out shopping, and at a TJ Maxx, I saw it and I was like, I need that. I don't know if you know what a TJ Maxx is or Marshall's, but they're here in the States. I was out shopping. I knew nothing about this deck and I fell in love. I love the cardstock. The body positivity, LGBTQIA+, and people of color are included in this deck. The artwork is super captivating. It's very expressive. It's very easy to read. I love the box. I think this magnetic closure is great. So that leads me to what I don't love about this deck. Actually, there isn't anything. My soul deck is the Modern Love deck by Ethany. I connect with that deck like nothing else. So that is absolutely my favorite. But barring that deck, this one is in second place. I love working with it. I love everything about it. No downsides. There is a hardcover guidebook that is in full color and has great insight into the cards. It even includes quotes for the major arcana. It also has a few custom spreads in the back, including a Luna Soul spread, which I really like. Okay, so let's talk about favorite cards. It was a struggle just to narrow it down to 5. But here's what I've got. Death. I love how the skeleton in Death is literally growing out of the ground and has a flower vine intertwined in its bones. I think it perfectly sums up the rebirth that this card symbolizes. Then we have the Tower. I love that one of the figures is falling from the tower and they're just praying for guidance. It shows choosing to be at peace during our tower moment can actually help us prepare for the rebuilding. Then we have the Two of Cups. I love the duality that's shown here and how integration can really help us get to the heart of any matter. Then we have the Five of Cups. I really love this depiction of the Five of Cups. It shows that a lot of the negative thoughts that we have about situations are really in our minds. This woman is laying on the forest floor. She has 2 full cups next to her, but she is filled with dread in her mind about the potential of spilled cups. Finally, we have the Four of Discs. The figure's hands are full of things that they hold most dear, but because of that, they're not able to pick up the key to the locked door and move forward. So they're clinging to that past. I think this is really great imagery for the Four of Pentacles. And then finally, who should buy this deck? Everyone. This deck is diverse, inclusive, easy to read for beginners, and it also has a lot of symbolism for the more advanced reader to dive into. I think this deck would be a wonderful addition to anyone's collection. And those are all of the tarot decks that I have flipped through on my channel so far. You can find links to each of them in the description box below. Make sure to let me know which of them are your favorites in the comments. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.